that from early church sources, they primarily tell us that James was a vegetarian. But not only James. These sources tell us, well, John the Baptist, regardless of the New Testament picture we get of eating locusts, which I don't think is accurate, I think John the Baptist is in the same mold, vegetarian, bathing sort of individual. The Pseudo-Clementine literature, as I told you, it's not a literature that is orthodox. It's actually an opposition Acts. It is the Acts written in the East against the powers of the Western Church. Acts, which presents a different Peter, a different James, same Paul, but a different Peter and a different James. In Acts we can say Peter is Paulinized. There's an episode in Acts where Peter gets a vision of a tablecloth coming down from heaven with, if you know Jewish dietary regulations, all kinds of forbidden food on it. Lobster, shrimp, I suppose, crabs and so on, snails, snakes. And a voice cries out from heaven saying, "Eat, Peter, eat." And Peter in this episode in the book of Acts says, "No, I have never eaten any unclean thing." That's probably authentic, that Peter had never eaten any unclean thing. It's the vision of the tablecloth that Paulinizes him. And after the voice cries out 3 times, by the way, the fact that Peter doesn't know that he can eat forbidden foods means that Jesus never taught it, even according to Acts. So Acts trips itself up there by trying to Paulinize its Peter. It inadvertently tells us the picture of Jesus we have in the scripture can't be authentic. Otherwise, why would Peter need such a vision? But that being aside, Peter then cries out, the voice cries out, "Eat, Peter, eat," 3 times, and Peter says finally, "I have now learned not to call anything unclean or profane, and not to call any man unclean." And then the Roman centurion comes, sending his servant, so that Peter is prepared to visit his household. But the Pseudo-Clementines give us a totally different Peter. That Peter does not eat forbidden foods, does keep away from all unclean things, is a vegetarian, is a daily bather, rises at the sun before dawn and prays. And what a beautiful Peter that is. To me, the information in the Pseudo-Clementines is 10 times more interesting and 100 times more beautiful than the Peter we get in Scripture. Because the Peter in our Scripture, if you look really carefully, we don't have any picture of him at all. He hardly does anything except argue with Jews, and basically what comes out of his mouth is anti-Semitic invective, and it's not a very, very pretty Peter at all. The Peter in the Pseudo-Clementines is absolutely lovely. The only problem is he's not Paulinized, he's Jamesian.
You're hitting on a really significant point. I've asserted in previous shows, and we're asserting tonight, that there was an earliest form of Christianity, this Essene, Ebionite, Nazarene Christianity, which was vegetarian, which was headed by James after the death of Jesus, that there's some early literature, the Clementines and Gospel of the Hebrews, other manuscripts that this group had, which was a sort of a vegetarian form of early Christianity. Obviously, the fact that Christianity did not continue to be vegetarian means that something happened. And my research has pointed to Paul as being the something that happened, and you just referred to Paul as being pictured in this Essene Christian literature, the Clementines, etc., as being the arch nemesis of Peter and James. Right. What can you tell us about that? I mean, Paul is considered by most people as the great hero of Christianity, but in this early Essene Christian literature, he's the arch enemy.
He's the arch enemy. He's the Antichrist incarnate. I think that's the way he was viewed that way in Palestine. Absolutely, that Paul was viewed as the Antichrist. I think there's a fairly wide consensus developing around the world now. It's not just my book, but Ann Wilson's book on Paul and some other books coming out, the Bajan Lee type books and so on, that are beginning to make it clear, the Chaim Maccoby books, that Paul is the originator of the Western form of Christianity as we know it. Paul and his associates, we don't want to say it's all Paul, but basically it's a Pauline view. But that is overseas Christianity in the West, the one that we're familiar with. And these documents that we have, they're all written in Greek. They come down through a Greek retention system, a Greek redaction system. Otherwise, they'd have been written in Syriac, Hebrew, or some other language. They're written in Greek, and they're Greek documents written by Greek for people from a Greco-Roman point of view. But that does not accurately reflect what was going on in Palestine. That's why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so frightening to some and so exciting to others, because here for the first time, almost like a time capsule, we have documents from the time of Christ, as I said, a little before, a little after, doesn't really matter. I don't want to get into the chronological problems, that show us what was going on in Palestine through the eyes of native literature. And this is terribly exciting, terribly explosive, and wonderful. And also we have all this other literature represented by the Pseudo-Clementines, apocryphal Gospels, reading in between the lines of Paul, early church literature to some extent that is being conserved from Eastern writers that give us a completely other form of Christianity. And it's quite clear that the Christianity that we know in Palestine and this other form was led by James, the brother of not John, who I don't even think existed, and that's an overwrite. That's a Western Christian overwrite in my view, to write the other James out and to marginalize him and make him into a less. We even have a character, James the Less, a lesser being. James was the leader of the early Christian church and in Palestine for all groups east, all groups from Palestine east. It's only in the West that we get the Paulinized tradition. So of course, our Christians are going to be familiar with the Western materials. We're beginning to show them there's another strand backed up by the scrolls, backed up by a lot of groups that you represent, the Essene groups, the Ebionite groups, a lot of other groups that were functioning over there that actually probably are the earliest form of Christianity and the most authentic